So every day, it's something new, isn't it? Every single day, some new crisis or another. It's all we can talk about. This is it. This is the one that will fill in the blank. This is the one who will get the president impeached. This is the one that will turn the presidency around. Depends on which news channel you watch. This is the one that will destroy democracy. This is the one that will save our country. This is the one that will destroy the world. This is the one that will save it. Every day. Every day, some new line has been crossed. This is the beginning of the end, the beginning of a new era. Always something. Something new. And if we are not careful, it can and it will overwhelm us. Something about the human condition that causes us to gravitate to one extreme or another. It's enough to give an observer whiplash. And on top of all that's going on in the world, Unitarian Universalism itself has experienced some very serious turmoil. And it's tempting, very tempting, to just walk away, to put up our hand, shrug it all the way, and say, the hell with it. Which brings to mind this meme, which has resurfaced lately in some UU circles. The shrugging guy, right? It's from a post, actually, from last year on a site called the Babylon Bee, which, according to the website, is your trusted source for Christian news satire. Now, in the corresponding article to this, it was kind of done as a news article. The Unitarian, it was said that the Unitarian Universalist Association has revealed its new logo to much buzz and fanfare. Replacing its previous logo consisting of a flaming chalice, the new logo is a shrugging emoji man said to represent the religious group's lack of certain belief in any doctrine or creed at all. And this also from that article, we wanted our logo to send a strong message about what we believe, UUA President Reverend Peter Morales told reporters gathered in front of the large banner with the new logo, unfurled just moments before. And we have no idea what we believe, really. So the shrugging man is the perfect strong symbol for our confused congregations to rally behind. So it's satire. But like all good satire, it's rooted in the truth. There is much confusion within Unitarian Universalism. And it's only partly due to our lack of a creed, but that has a contributing factor. Because that a creed, it can serve as an anchor in stormy waters, especially in times like these. Anchors can be helpful in an ever-changing world. But it is a changing world, so that anchors that can hold us in a storm can also prevent us from discovering new possibilities. Ours is a movement. We call it a movement for a reason. Because at our best, we are always moving forward, seeking new and better ways to be in community. So given all the turmoil in the world and in our denomination, how do we manage all this stress and anxiety? Since we don't have that anchor, we don't have that central pole, that umbrella that so many churches have there, one theology that says this will guide us through. So what do we do? Well, first, it's important to remember that we are stressed and we are anxious because we care. Because what is going on matters to us. Thomas Merton writes that the whole idea of compassion is based on a keen awareness of the interdependence of all these living beings, which are all part of one another and all involved in one another. Now, I venture to guess that most of us were not directly affected by the recent violence in Manchester, the ongoing violence in Syria, and the rest of the Middle East. I imagine most of us are not directly affected by the ongoing water crisis in Flint and in other communities, the failed war on drugs, the violent abuse of people of color by our own government, etc., etc., etc. Most of us in this room, I imagine, and let me know if I'm wrong, but most of us in this room are not directly affected by the worst of what is happening today out there. Most of us, I'm fairly confident, are living comfortable lives. Yet we are concerned all the same because we know that we are all the same. Now, this does not mean because we are, by our privileged status, generally excluded from the most virulent dangers of our world, that we are excluded from pain and suffering. No one is excluded from pain and suffering. Our members and friends, family members, who are ill, who are in pain, who are mourning. No one escapes it, as Longfellow wrote. Behind the clouds and the sun still shining, thy fate is the common fate of all. Into each life some rain must fall, some days must be dark and dreary. Even though we may recognize that fact intellectually, that it is that which something we all share, it can be difficult at times to not get lost in that darkness, in our own suffering. Which leaves us in a place not sure what to do, right? What is the best way to respond to what's happening around us, yet not get lost in it, not lose ourselves in the suffering? Let's see what you minister, Reverend Meg Barnhouse and Julian of Norwich, have to say on the matter. A little song. This is going to be hopefully it comes through. Yep.
She said, all will be well.
Julian of Norwich is venerated by many Christians, though she was never made a saint in the church. Her books describing her mystical experiences remain the oldest books in English written by a woman. And the bottom line of her teaching was that all will be well, as Reverend Meg Barnhouse pointed out. And she said this at a time in European history in which as much as 60% of the population was killed in the Black Death. It's reported that Julian had a series of visions that inspired her writings. And as I said, the lesson was all will be well. It does not ignore the suffering of the world. It accepts it. It actually embraces the suffering of the world. It invites us to love the world, not in spite of the suffering, but because of it. It invites us to recognize that suffering, though ubiquitous, it's not permanent. It invites us to recognize in ourselves and in all of creation that the bonds of love that transcend time and space and is present even in the worst of times, as long as we open ourselves to it. Of course, Julian called this transcendent force God. I don't think we need to name it in order to experience it. Because God for Julian was not some abstract belief. God was the name she gave her experience of the transcendent power of love. And her message is fundamentally no different than that of the Buddha or Rumi or any number of named and unnamed mystics and teachers, past and present. Where religions tell us what to believe and how to act, mystics like Julian invite us to look beyond our beliefs, our cultural preferences, and seek the truth that both undergirds and transcends all of reality. It's nothing new for most of us. These truths have been around for millennia. The prophets have told us, the history has showed us. When we respond to violence in all form, when we respond to violence with violence, nothing changes and violence persists. Love is the only proven way to change things. Love is the only viable response to hate if we truly wish to turn things around. We know this. So the issue is not what is needed of us. We know we need to love the hell out of this world. But how do we do that? How do we get there? How do we create the world we wish to live in? I have found that the critical flaw in most religions and philosophies is an implied should. Except that the only way the world should be is the way it is. So there's always some utopia out there, right? So if it should be this, if it should be something else, then it would be something else. Because we all believe in cause and effect, right? Because beware of those promised utopias. Because one person's utopia is another's dystopia. To be sure, it would be a safer world if we put an end to violence and corruption, right? It would be a more equitable world if we all had a roof over our heads and enough food to eat. It would be a more compassionate world if all people could feel their own inherent worth and dignity reflected back to them in every person they meet. So imagine all the different ways people have imagined of making this world a safer place. Safer for whom? Safer place, utopia, somebody else's dystopia. Those have imagined a more equitable world. They've created governments. It was a utopia for some, dystopia for others. But if we created a more compassionate world, where everyone felt their own inherent worth and dignity reflected back to them in every person they met, there would be no violence. And everyone would have enough food to eat. And everyone would have shelter. But to say it should be so by force of law or threat of damnation is to ignore the eternal order of things. The universe was built from the smallest to the largest, from simplicity to complexity. Creation did not emerge from above, but from below and from within. Evolution did not start at the top and work down. The eternal order of things shows us that the way to create the world of our dreams is to start with ourselves and move out from there. This isn't to say that certain laws to protect the vulnerable aren't necessary. Unfortunately, they are. But new laws do nothing to change long-standing attitudes and beliefs, as Martin Luther King pointed out. It may be true that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. It may be true that the law can't make a man love me, but it can restrain him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty important also. So while the law may not change the hearts of men, it does change the habits of men. Thus, any necessary legislation is but a first step. And that's as far as any government can go. But to change hearts, we must go a few steps further, and that is in our hands. So if we are to have any hope for all to be well, we will need to learn our ABCs of creating the sustainable, equitable, and compassionate world we long to live in. Acceptance is the A. That's your theme for the month. Be here now is the next. Common ground, and finally dialogue. Accept the world and everything and everyone in it as perfect. You are perfect. You are exactly as the circumstances of your life have made you. The idea that we should be skinnier, stronger, smarter, richer, the idea that other people should be different than what they are, these are all lies. You are exactly as you should be. Cause and effect. If you should be something different, you would be. Expectations of how things should be, how people should be, That's nothing more than premeditated resentment. Think about that. Do other people know what our expectations are of them? Do they know when they do not meet our expectations? And so we resent them for not reading our minds. I have made a career out of not living up to people's expectations. And if others have gained but a fraction of the wisdom I have from the experience, it's been worth it. It's been worth it even if others haven't, because I've learned a lot by not living up to what other people expect of me. When we accept that other people, places, and things are beyond our control, when we accept that the past cannot be changed, then, from that point, we can be here, now, in this moment, in this perfect moment. To be here, to be fully present in the moment requires us to let go of the past, let go of all the expectations of the future, and to embrace the world as it comes. If we miss the moment, we miss the clues. In the present, when we allow ourselves to fully live there, we are restored, made wiser, made deeper, and happier, says Marianne Williamson. When we are living in the moment, when we are present in the here and now, when we are not overwhelmed by thoughts of how things should be or how others should be, what we should be, when we're in that place, then it's much easier then to find common ground. Because it's in that present moment. Because we will remember that at the very least, every human alive shares the common experience of pain and suffering. Behind the clouds is the sun still shining. Thy fate is the common fate of all. Into each life some rain must fall. Some days must be dark and dreary. That is our common ground. If nothing else, we can connect at that level and begin a dialogue. I would argue that dialogue is actually one of the most important things we do as a religious community. We create the safe space and the opportunity for the sharing of our diverse perspectives to learn and to grow. Stephen R. Covey, author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, made the point that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And in my experience, he is spot on. Which means that most conversations are just competing monologues. But a dialogue is intended to help us know a perspective other than our own. We listen to understand, to see through the eyes of another. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it. We do not have to agree with the other perspective to understand it, to understand the person, what led them to their understanding. But through dialogue, true dialogue, it helps us know the world through the eyes of another person. Because this is how we best affirm the inherent worth and dignity of that person. My experience, that is when I have felt my own inherent worth and dignity is when I've seen it reflected back to me in another person and known that my life mattered, at least to them. In a recent meditation, Father Richard Rohr made the point: the great wisdom teachers and mystics say in various ways that you cannot truly see or understand anything if you begin with a no. You have to start with a yes of basic acceptance, which means you do not too quickly label, analyze, or categorize things as good or bad. Living out of the true self involves positive choice, inner spaciousness, and conscious understanding rather than resistance, knee-jerk reactions, or defensiveness. When we are in true dialogue, that is to say yes to the experience of others, no matter how different that experience may be. This is the problem with social media outlets. It's all superficial. And we read and respond not to understand, not to share love and compassion, but to be right, to insist that we're right and our side is right. And since the way social media works, only our friends who agree with us are seeing that, and so we get the impression that, yes, we are right, and everybody else is wrong. Dialogue is how we change the world. One conversation at a time. Because all will be well, one way or another. But to get there in our lifetime requires us to do more than be right. The path forward begins with the ABCs of life. Acceptance, be here now, common ground, dialogue. Eat vegan, foment peace. Give more than you receive. You get the point. But it all begins with acceptance. Who's perfect? Who's perfect? Y'all are. This congregation is perfect for this moment. How we move forward depends on how well we learn our ABCs. So be it. Amen. Blessed be.